like all music except for country. That's the title of this painting, and in today's video, I'm going to walk you through the artist statement of this piece. Aesthetics are something that I play a lot with in my artwork, and aesthetics aren't just superficial or artifice, as they often get associated with teenage girls and vanity and the fashion industry. But in fact, one thing I argue with my artwork is that they hold immense social power, shaping the perceptions of identity, class, and even regional belonging. Growing up in the Ozarks, I learned how the way you look, dress, and speak influences the way people see you and ultimately how you see yourself. My journey of shedding my Ozark and low-income aesthetic in an effort to fit in revealed to me both the resilience required of these identities as well as the way aesthetics subtly uphold systemic issues, from classism to racism, sexism, and of course they shine a light on our current political divide. In this video, I'm going to tell you stories from my childhood and adolescence to paint a picture of this for you, while of course simultaneously actually painting a picture. I did want to put a brief disclaimer in here because I am very passionate about talking about class. If you have followed my artwork for any length of time, pretty much all of my work can be directly informed by my experience growing up below the poverty line in the Ozarks, but I'm also keenly aware of the fact that I'm talking about class from the perspective of a white person, and considering that, especially in the United States, a lot of our classist policies are very intertwined with racism and ableism and how those identities really reinforce each other. I always want to be careful and clear in my target when I talk about these, and my grievances are never that white people can struggle too and therefore my voice trumps anyone else, but I want to be an echo and an enforcing narrator when it comes to how centering marginalized identities, specifically Black and disabled people, in these conversations around class is important. I'm telling my story because classism affects everyone, although a lot of the policies were aimed at Black and disabled people and other people of color. That white poverty is often, I always consider it sort of friendly fire. I think it's just important that I always reiterate that because I have to put in these disclaimers, but I am grateful to do so if it sort of clarifies that trope. And I think as a white person, you have to be careful with your grievances and be really, really distinct with who the target of your frustration is. And in this case, it's policies that strip away social safety nets and a lot of the negative stereotypes that come with profiling poor people. So my first story is the origin of the title of this painting, which is I like every kind of music except for country. And I have found over the years that that's unfortunately a very relatable trope, but I have a distinct memory of being 7, and one of the girls who grew up in the same apartment complex I did, it was government subsidized housing. I would go over to her house and we'd play music, and I remember a favorite of ours was Alanis Morissette, and we also listened to Britney Spears and Spice Girls, but occasionally she'd put on country music. I can only assume it was like Faith Hill or something, but as soon as I heard the twangy guitars, being a 7-year-old, I would roll around and convulse and act like the music was torturing me and scream, "Turn it off," and be dramatic. And it was just a long-standing joke between me and this friend that in order to get me to sort of stop on a dime and start acting crazy, she would just play country music. And the idea being, even at that age, that I could do all kinds of music, but I couldn't stand country. And maybe it was a mix of being keyed into pop culture or the stories of my mom smoothing out her South Carolina accent so she didn't sound, as she would say, dumb, that informed my own opinion that country music was somehow inferior or a lesser form of music. Now, of course, as a grown-up, I have found that there is, in fact, a lot of country music I do like, and that by sort of distinguishing the kinds of country music that better aligns with my values, more specifically as someone who grew up in the wake of 9/11, isn't this like sticky, sweet, saccharine, overly patriotic, Florida Georgia Line genre of music. Not to say if you like those kinds of music you agree with the sentiment, but rather that a way for me to sort of find peace with liking this genre of music has involved me finding music that really speaks to my values, and because of that, it's allowed me to enjoy this genre a lot more as a grown-up. Speaking of country music, there actually was a Dolly Parton song that I liked as a kid. Probably wouldn't have told you I liked it. Dolly Parton hadn't had her moment in the cultural spotlight, at least to us millennials and Gen Z, as she has in recent year, but it was the song called "Coat of Many Colors," and I remember particularly liking it because of a line in the song. In the third verse, it says, "My coat of many colors that my mama made for me, made only from rags, but I wore it so proudly. Although I had no money, I was rich as I could be in my coat of many colors that my mom made for me." I can remember the beauty of this quote, of the fact that someone couldn't make you feel poor without your permission. And I remember I held on to this almost like a mantra as I would sew together my own thrifted clothes. And I can remember feeling pride in the artistry, even when my 7th grade friends would point out that I obviously did it myself. I can remember almost physically feeling like I held on to this lyric, the idea that no one could make you feel poor without your permission. But I also have memories of times when it wasn't just a classmate snickering at my thrifted clothes that I'd clearly sewn together to make look distressed, as was the fashion of the time, but rather times when sort of teachers and institutions and things really left me out in the cold. For context, I went to a Title I school, which means that the majority of the kids were low enough income that they were on free and reduced lunch. And because of this, I didn't really have any experience with peer classism, and all the teachers there sort of had this "we're rooting for you" kind of energy that as a little kid you can't detect as anything other than loving. School was a different story. There were 3 elementary schools that fed into 1 middle school, 2 upper middle class, and then of course ours. And this was the first time I went from having peers who maybe sort of poke at the shortcomings from growing up in poverty to wide gaps between what I had and what my peers had, and the worst part in my opinion, which was teachers who really added on to the classism that I was facing. And the thing is, a lot of the teachers that did this, I wouldn't call them like mean people. I think a lot of it is just sort of the expectations we have of poor kids, and I have plenty of these experiences. I could make a whole video about it, but one that stands out was in 7th grade science when my teacher moved me to the back of the classroom because the girl sitting next to me complained that because I smelled like smoke, yes, my parents were smokers, they smoked inside, so I did probably reek of cigarettes, was causing her allergies to act up and that she would need her inhaler. And so the teacher, in front of everyone, had me get up and move to the back of the classroom where there was a few spaces between me and the nearest student. Maybe it was because I was sensitive, but in the months after this, it felt like my peers really ratcheted up their insults about me smelling like cigarettes and being dirty. For once, the Dolly Parton quote didn't feel comforting. It wasn't just me being sensitive to bullying, and yes, it was a little heightened because I was poor, but what I was picking up on at the time and what I didn't have words for was that I was sensing the structural and systemic nature of classism. And I can't tell you how other people experience it, but for me, this realization, especially before I had the language to digest what was happening, just felt like I was wildly out of control. And this is why classism was such a seductive option for me, which brings me to my final story. I can remember feeling like I wouldn't feel that out of control and that much ridicule if I simply just figured out how to fit in. And despite my best efforts in high school, this wouldn't really come to fruition until I was in college. I was lucky enough to get a running scholarship to a local private university. There was a moment in my very first month of college where I had saved up some money working hard over the summer, full-time plus overtime, to buy books and also to pay for 6 months of my car insurance. On one of the first days of practice, I showed up in my usual running attire, Sophie shorts rolled up with a big t-shirt and some off-brand shoes. And I remember the boys on the team specifically messing with me in this really uncomfortable way. They were sort of pointing out that I rolled up my Sophies, and I realized very quickly that I did not match the attire of the rest of the girls on the cross-country team. This teasing stung in particular because everyone on the team knew that I was from the rough side of town. This prompted me to dip into the money that I had saved up over the summer working a full-time job at a fast food restaurant. This money was set aside to buy books for the school year as well as to pay for 6 months of car insurance, and I ended up spending the part allotted for car insurance to buy some half zips, running shorts, new socks, sports bras, and some other things I needed to fit into the cross-country team. And I can remember feeling really guilty about this, probably because it's not good to drive without insurance. Of course, I'm not condoning that, but also because car insurance is important and buying clothes to fit in felt so vain and superficial. Fast forward to my senior year, and we had a big group of freshman girls. Most of them, as most of the cross-country team was middle to upper middle class, except for one other girl who had a similar background to me. She had bleached blonde hair, she wore heavy makeup to practice, had a little bit thicker of an accent, and didn't quite fit in. Because she didn't really fit in, the girls didn't include her in conversations, and you know, if you're a girl, kind of the obvious thing. She chose to socialize at the bars in town instead of going to the college parties. I remember the girls really using this as a reason why they didn't really mesh with her. Plus, she ended up getting an injury, and despite going to all the meets and being there as much as she could, she did end up sort of falling out of grace with the other girls on the team. She did end up quitting the team, and as far as I know, never completed college because of this. Watching her struggle really hit me hard because I spent most of college convincing myself that class didn't matter, that I was being sensitive for feeling different. But seeing this girl get picked apart for not fitting the aesthetic made me realize how much those clothes I bought really did help me, and I felt a lot less guilty for it. In the end, we're told what people think of you shouldn't matter and that it's vain to care about appearances. But we live in a world where aesthetics often holds real power, especially if you're marginalized. This series is about taking the things I was told to hide for survival and turning them into fine art as a way to not only find catharsis for myself, but hopefully to connect to other people who can relate to a lot of the things that I write about, and certainly the things that I paint about. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, I'm interested in your thoughts on the subject. Stay tuned for next week and a brand new video.